Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Flex podcast. I am your host, Samantha Praviti, and I am joined, as always, by the one and only Mike Triplett, longtime Saints beat reporter who you can find on the Twitter machine at Mike Triplett. Mike, how is your week off?
I know. I've had a couple. I had Monday Night Football, and then I had a bye week. I'm really getting to see what all these successful teams in the NFL are doing, like your Panthers.
Yes, like my Panthers that have 5 wins. I just need 2 more to get this over 6.5 wins that I talked about on convinced me at the beginning of the year. So I need to look good, right? For going up against the Titans like Simon Hunter and Chris Raybon and Sean Kerner. So hoping that one pays off for
We might have to do a live show from Saints at Panthers at Saints week 18 in New Orleans. We'll see if we can arrange that.
Well, we were talking
It'll feel like a bowl game that's played on December 28th or something.
The bowl game that no one wants to watch. I mean, we were talking about this before the show. You were asking me like, well, do I actually want them to succeed? I don't know. I mean, we've already lost our chance at a really good draft pick at this point with 5 wins. So I don't really know where we stand, who is even going to be the number 1 quarterback at this point. Things have definitely gotten shaken up for sure. So hopefully we get a good chance at one of them out there. It seems to be a decent class, at least better than last year's class. So hopefully there will be some people to choose from. I mean, Sam Darnold's not looking that bad, but I don't think he's the solution to anyone's problems. But speaking of quarterback drama in the NFL, I mean, obviously Baker Mayfield, we talked about him being released from the Carolina Panthers, and then the Rams are able to salvage Carolina's sloppy seconds and eke out a win in a crazy sort of game. Baker completed 22 of 35 for 230 yards, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions, rushed for 10 yards. The remaining schedule is not too bad. I mean, he's got Denver in 2 weeks, but otherwise it's a pretty decent schedule. Any takeaways from the Rams game, the very exciting Rams-Raiders game on Thursday night?
I mean, I don't actually believe it, but then again, like stranger things have happened and we need to replace Lamar Jackson and Jimmy Garoppolo. And, quarterbacks are getting injured left and right. I mean, we are going to be deciding, is it Brock Purdy? Is it, Russell Wilson might miss a game, not that he was on anyone's list, but Brett Ripien, all of a sudden, it's like, is Baker the most attractive pickup? It's a 2 quarterback league discussion probably, but I don't know. Maybe can you imagine being in a fantasy league where Baker Mayfield on the Rams ends up like leading you to a fantasy playoff title?
I know, right? And it's one of those things I can't tell if it was just one of those, like, because they're playing the Raiders who ranked 32nd in pass DVOA, or because it's just the element of surprise, because I don't think a lot of us thought that Baker Mayfield was going to start or play that much football. So I don't know. I'm not trying to make too much of it at this time. But in terms of other quarterbacks, Deshaun Watson, I mean, it's even of the available quarterbacks, a lot of guys are looking pretty sketchy. So I mean, Watson was rusty, slightly better, but I mean, it was a tougher matchup against the Bengals, who have only allowed multiple touchdowns in 1 game this year, multiple passing touchdowns, that is. So he passed for 276 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, rushed 6 times for 33 yards. They do have a nice-ish schedule down the stretch, but do you have any faith in Deshaun Watson going forward for fantasy managers?
Well, my biggest advice on him last week was maybe, it should lower your expectations for the pass catchers. But then they both had really good weeks. Donovan Peoples-Jones, who we're going to talk about later, and David Njoku, who, is a startable tight end. So I hope he's at least good enough to make those guys relevant. I don't know if he has anything to do with the fact that Nick Chubb is dropping off the table all of a sudden. But I hope that's not the case, because I know I have Nick Chubb on an important team, and I'm sure a lot of people made the playoffs because of Nick Chubb. So I hope he finds his game again. But look, I think Deshaun Watson, I don't think is going to be a season winner, but I also think there was a lot of rust to shake off, and that offense can at least be competitive again now that we saw some signs of life.
Sure. I mean, couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. But in terms of some more quarterback shakeups in the league. I just saw breaking news this past hour that Marcus Mariota seems like he is going to be headed to injured reserve, which means it is Desmond Ritter season. Do you think that that has a positive impact on guys like Drake London or even some of the running backs?
Uh, it's hard to think so, but I mean, obviously, what Mariota was doing in the offense they were running with him being run heavy and the whole team being run heavy was limiting the production of both Drake London and Kyle Pitts before he got injured. So I don't think it can hurt, and I think Drake London has been coming along and becoming somewhat fantasy relevant. I guess Mariota won't steal some of the carries away from the running backs there, but I don't think this would change what I'm doing with Drake London. If he was sneaking into my starting lineup, I'd keep him there until we at least see what it looks like.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat that I don't think it can get much worse for the Falcons offense. In terms of other things, like the running back situations across the league, I mean, we saw Cam Akers, who is kind of being pushed out there. I don't know if it's just maybe that they're trying to showcase him for some offseason trade stuff later on, but in terms of the Ravens, J.K. Dobbins was a surprise active on Saturday. They activate him off injured reserve, and I just said stay away from this whole situation because I didn't know what to expect from him. Then they had been getting Kenyon Drake incorporated and everything, and then Dobbins actually ended up stealing the show. 15 carries for 120 yards and a touchdown. Currently the RB8 in half PPR. He edged out Edwards in snaps by 26-21. So I guess we expect Dobbins is going to lead this backfield, assuming he's healthy. And I think Edwards will continue to play a role because, Lamar Jackson's hurt. Tyler Huntley is banged up, has a concussion, and who knows who's going to be starting this week. So they may have no choice but to lean on this run game because their pass game is so anemic. Any takeaways from the Ravens backfield right now?
Well, yeah, the real interesting thing, I mean, we can now stop messing around with Kenyon Drake, and Gus Edwards becomes a real tough decision. But the interesting thing with the Ravens MO that we're learning is they're so cautious with these guys, with both Dobbins and Edwards, and it has taken weeks longer for them to get back on the field in some situations than we expected. But when they play, like it's like cleared, green means go for these Ravens running backs. There's no like easing them back into action. So, I mean, it makes me feel like if I am a manager as J.K. Dobbins and he's active, I feel really good putting him in my starting lineup.
Yeah, well, kudos to the 70% of managers who hung on to J.K. Dobbins through all of this, because they may have a lottery ticket for the fantasy playoffs. But onto a bleak sort of list of injuries. I don't know if it's just because we're getting towards the end of the season and guys' bodies are just kind of getting just run down, but we saw a number of injuries. Some of these were just, there were a lot of concussions, starting with Tyler Huntley. We mentioned him, that was replaced by undrafted free agent Anthony Brown. T. Higgins, oh my goodness. I needed like 2 points from T. Higgins in one league, and he's active, plays 1 snap against the Browns, obviously no catches due to this hamstring injury. So I'm gonna have serious trust issues with him going forward. And then Tyler Boyd actually ended up getting banged up in that game as well, dislocated finger. You mentioned Russ in the concussion protocol and was quickly ruled out to return. Dameon Pierce suffered an ankle injury against the Cowboys, did not return to that game either, and their backfield was pretty lean after Pierce. Jeff Wilson Jr. had a hip injury against the Chargers, did not return. Mike White played through a rib injury against the Bills that sent him to the hospital afterwards, but the early reports are positive, so that's pretty good considering that he had another pretty good game, all things considered, against a very tough Bills defense. Corey Davis, head injury ruled out again. A lot of guys with head injuries. Kenny Pickett, add him to the list, and oh my God,
His second this year, right?
Right, and watching Mitch Trubisky, it's actually like actively painful to watch that guy play football. So every time I looked over, I was like, oh, interception. And then for the San Francisco 49ers, we've got Brock Purdy, had the oblique injury. Sounds like he should be okay, but obviously he's been stepping in for Jimmy G, who broke his foot in the week prior. And then Deebo Samuel suffered a high ankle injury, will likely miss the remainder of the fantasy season. So, wow,
Yeah.
it's really tough out there.
Well, first of all, we should probably just list for people the quarterbacks who are still usable. There's probably only like 4 of them.
Yeah.
And one of them is Justin Herbert, after what we saw last night.
Yeah.
But man, yeah, slim pickings at the bottom edges of the quarterback list. You know, obviously when it comes to injuries, we want to know what's actionable. Dameon Pierce reminds me exactly of the discussion we were having in Seattle last week, where it's like, all right, three guys might replace Dameon Pierce, and they're Eno Benjamin, Dari Ogunbowale, and Rex Burkhead. So good luck picking up any one of those 3 guys. Obviously, if Jeff Wilson Jr. is hurt, or if he's not, that feels like the Raheem Mostert show. So if you're in a real thin league, or if he's been on your bench, I feel like you can really trust him. Corey Davis opened the door for Elijah Moore to catch 6 passes. That feels like a season high. If it wasn't a season high, it was one of his top games. So there's a little hope there. And my favorite one is actually with Deebo Samuel being hurt, in addition to the quarterback injuries they've had. Yet again, Jordan Mason had another double-digit carries for over 50 rushing yards, and they're about to face the Seahawks defense. So I think there's an opportunity for him to become relevant, but no obvious, this opens the door for like somebody that you've got to go out and rush to the waiver wire for.
Yeah, it was just unfortunate because it was there were a number of guys on this list that you were like starting only because you probably had another injury in another situation, and then they weren't able to finish the game, which is just brutal, obviously, because week 14 is so crucial for a lot of fantasy managers, including myself. So hopefully you are at least on your way to the playoffs at this point. Let us move right into our waiver wire section. So we've got 6 teams returning from bye. As you mentioned, they are 6 less fantasy relevant teams overall, but we've got the Falcons, Bears, Packers, Colts, Saints, and Commanders returning from bye, and now we are officially done with bye weeks. Hallelujah. So let's kick it off with quarterbacks. I'm going to say that Mike White continues to be my favorite ad. I mean, like I said, I was surprised about how well he did against the Bills defense. They ranked number 7 in pass DVOA. He was banged up in the game, of course, and still managed to do okay, 268 yards, no touchdowns. But I mean, I think that that's pretty much to be expected. And they have an absolutely amazing schedule down the stretch. They've got the Lions, Jags, Seahawks, and Dolphins. Like, it doesn't get that much better in terms of passing defenses to face. The Lions are allowing the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this year. In terms of the other guys, I mean, we saw Brock Purdy in his first NFL start, and he looked pretty good out there. I know we mentioned that he was banged up in the game, but he's got the Seahawks and Commanders and Raiders and Cardinals to finish out the year. So that is another very, very enviable schedule there. Taylor Heineke, someone else to just throw back on the radar because he had a decent game in week 13, 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, finished as the QB 11, and he gets to face the Giants once again. So hopefully that should bode well if you need a 1-week type start. And then Ryan Tannehill is facing the Chargers, and he did pretty well against the Jaguars, even though they lost the game. Any of these guys stand out to you? And do you want to tell us if Andy Dalton is worth picking up?
Andy Dalton just got named the starter again for this week. So it's going to be Andy Dalton at home against the Falcons and Desmond Ridder. A game that'll have such fantasy.
Yeah.
Although I'll tell you what, this is a complete aside though. I think the Saints are going to make a very strong effort to whatever they salvage this season. I think they're going to try to have Alvin Kamara lead the way, and his matchups do get better. I don't know if the matchups are good enough for Andy Dalton to be fantasy relevant. Ryan Tannehill is so boring, but nobody seems to be picking him up, and he's perfectly fine compared to a lot of these lists that are a little bit more gambles. I'd probably lean toward Tannehill over a Mike White or Brock Purdy, just because you kind of know what you're going to get from Tannehill. And I do like Taylor Heineke a little bit. I like that we just saw him play pretty well against the Giants. He's playing against the Giants again. If you're the type of person who likes to watch your fantasy players with the matchup on the line, he's got Sunday Night Football this week in a game that'll probably determine which two of those teams makes the playoff. But I really do think with Jahan Dotson, who we're going to mention, you can mention the two of them together. They've been coming along together, and obviously Terry McLaurin there. He's got people to throw to. So I like Taylor Heineke more than almost anyone on this list.
Fair enough. And any thoughts on picking up Baker Mayfield? I know we kind of talked about that before.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you're down to Mayfield versus versus who did I say, Brett Rippon or Desmond Ritter, then maybe you ride the Mayfield train because it's fun to watch. Maybe you're down to Baker Mayfield versus Sam Darnold. I'll throw the question back to you. Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield, the question that drove Carolina all offseason.
I would probably take Sam Darnold at this point, but that's from being burned watching Baker Mayfield all season. Yeah. So maybe a little bias there. In terms of the running back position, it's actually probably one of the worst weeks for running back I think I've seen in a while. Last week, I feel like we had some good guys. We had James Cook and Rashad White, like that type of guy. That's, he's not going to win you a league, but he's at least startable as maybe like an RB2 type guy. Zon of the Night stands out to me. So we did relax the threshold this week because things were just so lean. So normally we use a 50% threshold. We used 60% of this week. Zon of the Night is out there at about 45% of leagues right now and performed well in spite of a pretty difficult matchup against the Bills. 17 attempts for 71 yards and a touchdown. Also caught 2 passes for 6 yards. Currently the RB 11 and half PPR with 1 game left to play. We mentioned that schedule, which is just super, super exciting with the Lions, Jags, Seahawks, and Dolphins to finish out the year. So he would probably be my number one claim. Chuba Hubbard, coming off of his best fantasy game of the season in the upset win over the Seahawks, 14 rushes for 74 yards and a touchdown, and caught all 3 of his targets for 25 yards. He was more effective than Donta Foreman, who outsnapped Hubbard by a count of 34-23. Hubbard is the RB9 heading into Monday night, and I'd like his usage in the passing game. That's really important for a team that happens to be behind a lot. So he has a decent schedule down the stretch: Steelers, Lions, and then Bucks and Saints, but at least the Lions will be an interesting sort of matchup there. Why don't you talk to us about Jordan Mason, who's someone you have been sort of pumping up for a while?
Yeah, well, I just look, everybody sees Christian McCaffrey and assumes that his quote unquote backup isn't going to get any touches. And that's just not the case with how San Francisco has operated since they've gotten Christian McCaffrey. Elijah Mitchell was getting a lot of work while McCaffrey was there. And then when Elijah Mitchell went down for the season, it's been more than 50 rushing yards. And I think it was 8 carries for 51 and then 11 for 56, if those are the right numbers for Mason the last 2 weeks. And now you throw in the fact that Deebo Samuel's going to miss the rest of the year, and he's not going to be part of that rushing attack anymore. And they're going against the Seahawks. I mean, you just talked about the week that Chuba Hubbard had, and the Panthers did it with 3 running backs. Everybody's been running on the Seahawks all year. So I think Jordan Mason could be a real sneaky value this week. On the flip side, though, I agree with Zonovan Knight. He's the one I'd want to invest in most from this list. But the Lions are not an easy matchup anymore. I don't know where it came from, but Dalvin Cook just got like 26 yards on 16 carries against the Lions. They've like got this stout run defense all of a sudden that's been pushing their playoff push. So I almost might go with Mason over Knight this week, even though Knight is probably the one I'd want over the next 3-game haul. I just like the matchup so much better for Mason. With Hubbard, with Gus Edwards, they both have that sort of, their role becomes much bigger if there's an injury. But, now that we're down to your final 3 weeks, your final 2 weeks, that investing for the future becomes less and less. And I don't know what you do with the Texans. I mean, I guess this kind of reminded me, I think last week I said in Seattle, I mean, if there's one person that they're going to have some sort of role, it's probably Travis Homer. He ended up having the only role because of the injuries there. And so you could look at him again, but maybe Darian Gubawale is that guy for the Texans, because at least he's probably going to get the third down back role, if not bigger. But if you're in the playoffs and you're starting a Texans running back this week, other than Dameon Pierce if he comes back healthy, Good luck to you.
Yes, good luck to you. I mean, it is tough to get excited about a guy who had -3 rushing yards last week. That is Dario Ngonbuwale, but he did outsnap Rex Burkhead by a count of 18-5. So I guess I would be slightly more enthused about him, especially mentioning the third down role. They face the Chiefs, so I feel like there would be more passing than rushing in that game. On to the wide receivers. There are actually more options here for sure. That is definitely the most flush position, I would say, for the waiver wire this week. Zay Jones continues to taunt you, Mike. Caught 8 of 12 for 77 yards and a touchdown. Second top 10 finish since the Jags bye. He does get the Cowboys and Jets next, so it's not the best matchups or anything like that. But the Jags just continue to just chuck the ball. Trevor Lawrence had an absolute career game last week, so that is something to keep an eye on for sure, if not for this year, but maybe for the future. Some two guys that are coming off bye, we've got Alec Pierce and Jahan Dotson. We talked about them last week. Both could definitely be worth adding. The Colts have a pretty nice stretch. They've got the Vikings, Chargers, Giants, and Texans to finish out the year, so that's a pretty good schedule to finish out the season. The Lions, I just want to keep saying that first of all, last week it was a good call about Jared Goff in terms of a streaming type quarterback. This team is just looking so much healthier now. I mean, DJ Chark is back. DeAndre Swift looks healthier. Jameson Williams now on the field, and he did only catch one pass, but he made it count with a 41-yard touchdown. So, I mean, maybe it's not going to happen this year, but it's something to work to keep monitoring, especially if you're in a keeper league. Like, you should definitely be having that guy on your roster. DJ Chark, though, had the best game, 6 of 7 targets for 94 yards and a touchdown, outperformed Amon-Ra St. Brown, who caught 6 of 9 for 68 yards. We did mention Elijah Moore. He saw a season high 10 targets this week. So, I mean, that's definitely a situation to monitor with Corey Davis getting banged up in that last game. We've just been talking about this. The schedule is really attractive. So definitely another person that I would like to keep an eye on. And then the Rams guys, I mean, it's like, I don't know. Things get thinner there. So yeah, I mean, there was like a trio of guys that are trying to basically fill the giant void left by Cooper Kupp. I mean, they all sort of got points, but it was against the Raiders. So I don't know how much to make of that. Who are your favorite pickups on the wide receivers this week?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Jahan Dotson. We talked about it last week, and I mean, I put him in that Jameson Williams category. The difference is whatever Jameson Williams coming off, the injury list did for DJ Chark. It's like all of a sudden DJ Chark has just come to life there. So I worry about opportunities for all three of those receivers in Detroit. But I'm a big fan of Jahan Dotson. You had a stat about how many points he had in 4 of the 8 healthy games that he played. He's been a startable wide receiver in fantasy, but he's a rookie first round pick who was dealing with some minor nagging injuries earlier this year and is coming on strong at the end of the season and playing his best football. I mean, I think kind of out of sight, out of mind, but he's a real talent and he's starting to show it on the field. And I think the opportunities are just going to keep coming down the stretch. So I'm excited. I'd trust putting him in my starting lineup and even, a regular standard 12-team league right now if I needed to. Zay Jones, obviously you have to trust the just like the consistent production is there. I'm a little leery of, we're going to talk about Evan Ingram in a minute, who was just a monster yesterday. I don't think this is an offense. Trevor Lawrence is not going to throw for almost 400 yards every week. So I don't know if it's an offense that can sustain Evan Ingram and Zay Jones and Christian Kirk. So you play a little bit of roulette there if you start one of those guys, but he's clearly part of that big 3 for them. And they kind of consolidate their targets to those 3 guys. And the same thing is true for someone who's not on this list, but I think he counts. Donovan Peoples-Jones, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he's still at 58%. And he played 100% of Cleveland's snaps while having a big game yesterday, 95, 96, 99% of their snaps over the last 3 or 4 weeks. So the opportunity is definitely going to be there. I mean, we're talking about people you can't necessarily count on consistency, but that kind of snap count at least gives you a fighting chance.
You were totally right about Donovan Peoples-Jones. I just forgot when I expanded the list to add him, but he would definitely be one of my top adds this week at the wide receiver position. And in terms of Dotson, the stat that I had last week, in the 8 games he's played, he's scored double-digit fantasy points and finished as a top 24 receiver 4 times.
Yeah.
So he's definitely, when he's healthy, he's got a good chance to be fantasy relevant. And yes, playing his best football of the season so far. So definitely a guy that I am excited to watch moving forward. In terms of the tight end position, it's Evan.
I'm excited about it this week, Samantha.
Are you?
For the
Is it just
first time
it's an
in a
Evan
long
Ingram
time,
and
I'm
then
excited
a
about
whole
it.
rest of guys? Like Evan Ingram had a career game, currently the tight end 1, caught 11 of 15 for 162 yards, 2 touchdowns, a second top 5 finish in 2 weeks, third in 6 weeks, and he's finished as a top 9 tight end or better in 5 of the last 9. So that is a pretty good stretch for a position that is not known for its consistency. After that, I would say there's a pretty significant drop off. We like Tyler Conklin. He's a guy that is at least popped up on here a number of times, and I like what the Jets team looks like with Mike White under center. Chig Okonkwo and Austin Hooper, those 2 Titans tight ends, they had decent games. Hooper caught 5 of 5 for 68 yards, and Okonkwo caught 6 of 6 for 45 yards and a touchdown. Snaps were pretty even between them. So I think if you're in a deeper league, they're definitely worth looking at. I know Okonkwo was a big DFS winner this week. So talk to us about Evan Ingram and your love for him.
Well, here's why I'm excited. I've got a recommendation for 3 different levels of leagues. I'm not really excited. I'm never really excited about the tight end position. But first of all, if you were in like the shallow league or the one where people aren't paying attention, just check to see if Dallas Goedert is available, because he's only 84% rostered, and he's been talking very promisingly about feeling like he's going to come back as soon as he's eligible for this week. So maybe you could sneak him in ahead of other people in your league. And then on the flip side, I'll go to shallow. I think Chig Okonkwo, I mean, he is a rookie 4th round draft pick who, the reason he wasn't doing much early in the year, I mean, he wasn't playing a big role, but once they have introduced him into this offense, his role has just grown and grown and grown. And from following the Titans reporters, he feels like kind of the big talking point there every time they get Todd Downing in front of the microphone, and he's promising, we've seen it from him now. I saw a stat, and I meant to look this up right before we came on, but before last week anyway, he was leading all tight ends in the NFL with 40-yard catches, and while only playing basically 1/4 of the season's worth of snaps. So he's a big play waiting to happen. My friend Teron Davenport, who covers the Titans, he had him in his whiteboard session that he does every week, showing how they can draw up Travis Kelce type plays for him. So he's an exciting kind of big play guy. And then he got in the end zone. He made a really fantastic catch on the 2-point conversion. So I like what we're seeing from him. Maybe that'll pay off more next year. But if you're in like a real deep league and you've been cycling through like a different Saints tight end every single week or something like that to fill that position, I think there's some real potential there, and they're talking excitedly about getting him more involved. But Evan Ingram, I think obviously is the one who's available in the most leagues that could do the most help. I kind of hate Evan Ingram because he had this wave in the middle of the season where he had 3 or 4 weeks that he put together right in time for us to start recommending him, and then he goes quiet for 2 or 3 weeks after that. And that's
just how it works on this show.
Yeah,
the moment we recommend him or the moment we write someone off, they have a career game. So
but here I've got interesting numbers. So if you're willing to be like, I'm tired of doing this every week, I'm going to pick him and just ride him through the playoffs. The end results, he moved from tight end 16 on the season to tight end 4 on the season with this one game. So he is 4th in the league in fantasy points for tight ends on the season, 3rd in the NFL in routes run, 4th in receptions, 5th in receiving yards. He's like, if you're willing to realize there's going to be highs and lows, he's been at basically a top 5 tight end for the season. So, after a big game like this, it might not just be a fluke, but one of the next 3 weeks, he's going to have 1 catch for 11 yards, and it's going to come at the wrong time. And forget I ever said this if that happens to you.
Definitely. Well, I mean, that's high praise that your colleague or friend was comparing Okonkwo to Travis Kelce type plays. It's not the most exciting passing offense, but certainly he's getting it done, and he's a talented talented young guy. So should definitely be on people's radars, especially if you're in dynasty or keeper type situations. But I think that will do it for today's episode of the Fantasy Flex. Make sure to check out Mike and mine and Sean and Chris's weekly sort of waiver wire roundtable on actionnetwork.com. And please remind everyone where they can find your work.
Yep. I work for New Orleans Football, a subscription site for everything Saints. If you want to pour into the nitty gritty and figure out how they're going to turn things around this year, whether that includes cleaning house or subtle changes, we will find out soon.
Sweet. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Don't forget to email those mailbag questions to mailbag@actionnetwork.com, and we will see you all next week. Good luck with week 1 of the playoffs.